Hello. It's the Divine Code reading for July 9th, pages 63 and 64. Page 63 is in the chapter on proselytizers and false prophets. Halakha number 9. This only applies to someone who prophesies falsely in the name of God. Okay, this is the halakha prior to this one was speaking of a person that prophesizes in the name of Hashem, in the name of God, but he's a false prophet. He is judged by the Jewish court, this Jewish Sanhedrin, rather than a B'nai Noach court, a Noahide court. That's because he's prophesying in the name of God. That puts it in that jurisdiction. Anyone who prophesies in the names of stars, constellations, or other idols is judged by a Noahide court like one who actually serves idols. For anyone who prophesies in the name of an idol says about it, in effect, that you are my God. Thus, by his own words, he accepts the service of the idol, and he is liable for this. And that can also be compared to the person who proselytizes people to worship himself, claiming that himself is a god, because that's making himself an idol. But then it also means that he's speaking on the behalf of the idol, and that can be a reason why that person would be executed, whereas other proselytizers would not necessarily be executed. But the person that makes himself a deity and speaks in the name of himself to worship himself would put him in this classification as a person who's executed by a Noahide court. The Divine Code, page 64, the beginning of chapter 3, the prohibition against making a new religion or adding a commandment. Halakha number 1. Moses, our teacher, gave the Torah and its commandments, meaning the learning of the Torah and fulfillment of the 613 Jewish commandments, as an inheritance only for the Jews. As it says in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 3, the Torah which Moses commanded us is an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. So the Torah was given on Sinai. It becomes an inheritance. It becomes connected with the Jewish people. Other nations can be aware of it, and other nations can take on the Noahide commandments, that can take on the aspects of Torah that apply to them. But the level of inheritance, that's with the Jewish people. And anyone who chooses to become Jewish through proper conversion. So if a person can choose to become Jewish, and in that choosing to become Jewish connects to Torah on the level of inheritance. So in that sense, it's open to the general population through becoming Jewish, a full convert. But one who does not want to convert is not obligated to accept upon himself the Torah and the 613 commandments. The rest of humanity that's not Jewish is not required to do this, to take on the entire Torah, like as in the manner that a Jew does. In a sense, for a Jew, it's not a matter of choice. The Jew, it's an inheritance in the sense that the Jew does not have a choice. It just simply is that he is connected to the Torah in that manner. Likewise, Moses was also commanded by God to compel all the nations of the world to accept the 7 Noahide precepts that they had been commanded. We have a long footnote, footnote 51, speaks of Rambam in the Laws of Kings, chapter 8, halakha 10. It appears to the author, that's the author of the Divine Code, that even though Rambam uses the words to compel only regarding these 7 commandments and does not include other obligations of the Noahide Code, that is, prohibitions against cross-mating animals and cross-grafting fruit trees, and observing worthy precepts which the nations have a rational obligation, such as honoring parents and avoiding deception. Nevertheless, it is logical that they must be compelled to keep the obligations that are placed upon them as part of their commandment to observe dinim, a legal code. There's 2 major questions regarding how the nations are to follow dinim. One opinion is that the nations take on the mishpatim concepts in the Torah. The Torah has a long list of basic aspects regarding property rights, damages, what happens if somebody's car skids on the ice and causes damage, that type of stuff. It's all covered in the Torah. The question is whether or not the nations should take on these various commandments that are found in the Torah. They're referred to as logic. In the Torah, they're called mishpatim. That means logical precepts. Should the nations take these on, just say, okay, the Torah says these are logical, therefore I should believe that they're logical, and therefore we should take them on? Or there's another opinion that the nations determine their own laws according to what logic makes sense to them, other than the 7 Noahide laws, which are non-negotiable. But beyond that, the question of what happens if a car skids on the ice and causes damage, those laws would be determined by the individual nations. They have legislatures that debate it and make determinations, and that becomes on the level of Torah, through the law, through the requirement to have a court system. Those legislated laws would become on the level of Torah for those nations. Those are the 2 different opinions, and the Divine Code appears to be taken the position that these logical precepts explained in the Torah should be part of the laws for the nations, and the nations should be compelled to take on the mishpatim in the Torah. That appears to be what's being said here. We have left out Rambam's statement. One who accepts them is called a ger teshav, Hebrew term translated as Gentile resident of the Holy Land. and all the laws of Ger Teshuvah, because they do not apply when the observance of the 50-year cycle of Jubilee in the land of Israel is suspended, as Rambam writes in the Laws of the Worship of Stars and Idols, chapter 10, halakha 6. If a Gentile declares his acceptance of the Noahide commandments before 3 observant Jewish men, it does not change anything in regard to his obligation to observe the Noahide code or his merit to be called one of the pious of the nations. This formal declaration of acceptance only permits the Jews to allow the Gentile to live as a resident in the land of Israel in accordance with Torah law. This is a very complicated and easily misunderstood. It's very difficult to go through the laws concerning Ger Teshuvah. Rabbis through the centuries, through the millennium, have explained the Ger Teshuvah in their writings, in their teachings, and oftentimes they're referring to something very specific within their teachings, and even sometimes the same rabbi in different teachings will explain it in a different way. We have to be very careful when going through the issues of Ger Teshuvah to understand a lot of times the teachings are like if you have automotive parts from different cars, they don't always fit together. A carburetor from one car is not necessarily, you're not going to be able to swap it out with a carburetor from another car. There's differences between them that are not compatible. So when we're looking at the rabbi's teachings, we have to look specifically at that teaching and know how it's being explained. And don't just jump to quick conclusions of saying, oh, well, the rabbi was referring to something else. This other rabbi was referring to something else in another writing, and I'm just going to apply it. I'm just going to toss it together into one mishmash. That's not how we learn Torah, especially something as complicated as the Ger Teshuvah. We have to look at each piece individually and how it's being applied in that specific instance, and then get a broader picture after much thought. There is a curiosity in the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. He speaks of the Ger Teshuvah, the acceptance of a Ger Teshuvah, in several locations, in a handful of locations, where he's talking about the Ger Teshuvah being accepted. Most of the cases, he makes this statement that we only accept the Ger Teshuvah in the time of the Jubilee year. But he doesn't say this in all the cases. And this is a curiosity. We know that the Rambam is very meticulous in everything he put together. He didn't write this stuff in one draft. He organized it in a very methodical manner, in a very thoughtful way. If he was going to make it as a universal concept that the Ger Teshuvah was only accepted when there's a Yovel year, or the time of the Yovel, then he could have just said it one time. Or to be careful, or to be thorough, he could have said it every time. The fact that he says it most of the time, but not all of the time, implies that there's variables involved. And this is an area that we have to look at more deeply. It's going to have to be looked at more deeply. Why does the Rambam say it in some places but not other places? And in chapter 8, halakha 10, he makes a curious statement that when the Noahide makes this declaration before the Jewish court, it's accepted in all places. Sometimes it's understood that all places, usually it's understood that all places mean anywhere on the planet. It's been explained to me that the straight reading of the grammar could be understood that it means anywhere within the Mishnah Torah. This is the case. So it's a very complicated subject that needs more analysis. On all parties have to get more analysis to this. Also, there's within Noahide groups, we're having these acceptances, Noahide declarations that are being said in front of a Jewish court, or a court of three, a group of three rabbis that in fact convenes as a court. They're making these declarations. So what is the significance of these declarations? According to some understandings, according to the divine code's understanding, the people already have an obligation to follow the laws. According to some teachings, some well-respected rabbis' teachings, they have an obligation to follow the laws, but they don't take it on the level of Torah unless it's done in front of three judges, unless it's done in front of a court, or unless the person understands that he's doing it because it was given to Moses at Sinai. If he doesn't understand it that way, then he would not be on the level of Torah, and he would not be considered part of the pious of the nations. According to other understandings, it doesn't make a difference. And from what I understand, that's the teaching of the divine code, is that it doesn't make a difference. I would suggest this is another area that needs to be looked at more deeply. The formal declaration and acceptance only permits Jews to allow this Gentile to live as a resident in the land of Israel in accordance with Torah law. Silukute Sikot, volume 26, page 134. And other locations, which explains that this is the opinion of the Rambam. It appears to also be the opinion of Rashba in Torah Abayit, quoted in Beit Yosef, Yoredea, chapter 124. And we do not require him to accept it in front of a Jewish court of three. It seems clear from the Kesnef Mishnah on Hilkot Avot Kohavim, chapter 10, that Rambam rules that nowadays, if a Gentile wants to act as a Ger Teshav by keeping the Noahide code, Jews should not prevent him from living in Israel. So the basic legal aspect of taking on the Noahide code, these Noahide declarations in front of a Jewish court, is to allow the person to live in Israel. In the time that there's the Yovel, when there's a temple, when there's a Sanhedrin, when Israel was being ruled according to Torah law, a person that wanted a residential status, a non-Jew wanting residential status in Israel, would have to take on the Ger Teshav status in front of a court. Today, we don't have the circumstances for that court system, and therefore the Rambam is saying that if a person wants today to live in the land of Israel, it's not necessary to do this in front of a court. It does not seem to be the opinion of Ramban and Ritva in Tractate Malkut 9, who says that a Gentile is not fulfilling a commandment unless he accepts them before a Jewish court of 3, and then he is called a ger teshav. So a person that does not steal, it's proper for them not to steal. Adam was told, Noah was told, Shem was told, tell people not to steal. So they don't steal. But in order for it to be a Torah commandment, according to the Ramban, in order for it to be a Torah commandment, the person would have to take it on as a Torah commandment. Otherwise, he's just being a decent human being by following these things. This may mean that this applies when all Jews are gathered to Israel and the Jubilee year is in effect, for the Gentiles will need to make this declaration to be granted residence in Israel. Nowadays, however, it may not make any difference in their obligations to observe these commandments. The question on their opinion arises because it is unclear whether they hold, like Rambam, that the literal ger teshav status does not apply in our days. And therefore, we come to the conclusion that this declaration makes no practical difference. Or if they hold, like the Ra'avad in the Laws of Forbidden Sexual Relations, chapter 14, that there is a concept and the granting of a ger teshav status even in our times. If Ramban and Ritva hold like Ra'avad, it would be obvious that their opinions is that this is the only true way to fully accept the Noahide commandments. And they would then say that this applies nowadays. So that the Ramban and the Ritva, if they're following the Ra'avad with this, then you would have to go before a court of 3 Torah scholars, Jewish Torah scholars, in order to take on the mantle of Torah regarding the 7 Noahide commandments. And the Divine Code has taken the position that that's not necessary. The Rambam seems to take this middle position that they take it on if they're taking it on, but the Rambam does not require doesn't state at that point that the person needs to be taken on in front of a court, but he somehow, the person is taking it on because he's following it because it was given through Moses at Sinai. The commandment was given through Moses. Then the person is taking on the Noahide commandments. And everything is kind of laid out here. I'm suggesting that it needs to be looked at more deeply, and more analysis has to go into it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of conflicts that are occurring over this aspect, and there's really not any reason for the fighting that goes on. There's reason for. The reason is to study this more deeply. Thank you.